All right, hey everybody. This is Tycho, and I'm gonna be doing a live set, kind of live with dub, controlling basically stems, and then here I'll show you my setup here. I'm gonna be playing a this is like an early '80s Mini Moog Model D, which is like one of the last of the original run of these, and it's outfitted with opto key, so it has MIDI and everything. I have like a reissue, and they're very similar, but I use the reissue for the live set. So that's in storage right now with all the other live equipment. I'm going to be using, I don't know if you can see this, this is all the kind of effects I'm going to be using today. This got like some Strymon stuff and the Auto BAM and Electron analog heat. And then over here, I'll try to turn over here once in a while. I'm going to be sequencing most of it off this Arturia KeySet Pro, and then doing arpeggiations off of this Novation. So this is basically just like going to be controlling the Mini Moog. So I'll get started, and I'll be doing a Q&A afterwards if anybody has any specific questions or anything. All right. That was fun. Let me adjust this camera. All right. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Yeah, that was mostly the mini Moog for the live set. Obviously, we have like a whole band, Rory and Zach and Billy, and a bunch of instruments, but you know we're locked down, so it's just me with the synths. So yeah, I usually for the live show I play this, not this exact one, a reissue, which basically sounds the same. It's based on a different revision. This is like a late model revision, like a 3, but you know, to my ear, you can get pretty close to both the sounds. They're almost exactly the same. But yeah, that was really fun, tweaking on the effects and stuff. So I will take some questions that you guys asked during the stream. Okay. Is that a PV 1600 fader box in the background? I don't know what, if you're referring to this is a Zuma. This is just a power supply for pedals. But no, or maybe you're talking about this. This is the, this is a soft tube. It's called the Fader Console 1. And it basically just controls your DAW or Universal Audio's Apollo system. It's just hardware control for kind of like software. But it's really useful for like doing, I usually use, in the studio, a lot of the times I'll use this SSL for kind of like dub stuff or like, you know, just like mixing tracks quickly or bringing in and out like effect sends. So I can do it, you know, instead of using, I use a lot of plugins, but like this system right here is kind of like my go-to effect system. So I'll put that in aux send and bring that up and, you know, kind of affect that individually. This is kind of like a modular effect system. Basically, the signal comes in right here to this Big Sky, goes onto the timeline, and then to the Flint, which is like a reverb kind of tremolo, and then it hits this patch bay, and at this patch bay you can either send it directly to the auto band, which is a reverb, or you can send it to this, and then this can be sent to this, whatever. You can move everything around modularly, and then this is the last stage. It's like a tape saturation emulator, a strum and deco, and that's what I was kind of like playing with the outputs of to bring up. That'll basically bring up the wet sends, the effects. So it's kind of like having like a little tape machine. Is the summer tour canceled? I mean, it pretty much looks like it. I think we're gonna make some sort of, you know, statement today on that. Something very specific. But I mean, as far as I know, you know, like I've kind of had my head down on some remixes. So like, I think I'm not the best person to ask right now, but I'm gonna get with everybody. Actually, today we have a meeting to figure that out. But yeah, it seems like it. So sorry about that, and hopefully you know, we can get back to playing shows again soon. But I mean, I think all of our, you know, everybody's biggest concern is just keeping everyone healthy, and you know, shows are fun and shows are cool and all that, but it's not worth risking anybody's health or safety. So, you know, once every scientist and health expert comes out and says it's okay, we'll do it. Hold on, I'm going to turn on this fan. In a basement here, it gets hot sometimes. So, is that mix? Yeah. So on the screen, somebody asked, "Is that a mixer on the screen?" I have basically a couple. I have the Universal Audio. I don't know if you can see that. Probably not. Universal Audio's Apollo console. I'll turn it there a little bit. So it's just like a software mixer, but it uses real-time like plugins, so it's kind of like a hybrid workflow. It's cool. And then this other one is for the links, which is the converter, and this is like a digital router for signals. What was the new song at the end? If you're talking about the arpeggiation, I was just messing around with the S49, so it's not a song. I have like a billion of those because I really love arpeggiators and like hardware sequencers to just, you know, fire them at some synth. And then the cool thing is like, I feel like, you know, for me, production and effects are kind of the biggest part of the sound. Like the melodies and the core songwriting is almost secondary in a lot of respects. So like, I really like to play into effects and play effects as an instrument. And, you know, when you're trying to play the keyboard or guitar and control the effects, it's not quite as effective. So, you know, I'll trigger them I'll write a sequence or create an arpeggiation and trigger the synth and just have it running through effects. And then I can actually like play the effects as the sequence is running. So that's kind of like, that's one of the main ways I I kind of sit down and write some of the basic concepts is just by, making a little sequence and playing with effects till I find like a delay pattern or something interesting that changes it and does something that I wouldn't have thought of, and then I'll like print that and use that as the basis for a song. Sometimes it won't even end up in the final song, but it's a nice starting point. The most versatile piece of equipment, I mean, yeah, it's tough to say. I think, it depends on what you're talking about. If you're talking about synths, it's definitely the Mini Moog. This is my primary instrument. I think of this as like this is my instrument. Like all these other ones I can play and I understand, but not in the way that I understand and can play this. I mean, obviously this is a very simple synthesizer, so it's easy. It's deceptively simple. You can do a lot with it. It's actually kind of interestingly flexible in these really cool ways, but on the surface, it's a great way to learn synthesis because you just have basically, you have these, I don't know if you can see that. Let me turn that a little bit. You basically have these 3 oscillators. This is where the sound is generated, and you just have 1, 2, 3. And then you have a mixer, which is where you mix, these are all basically independent sounds. And, I mean, they're not independent because when you trigger them, they all get triggered at the same because it's monophonic. But basically you can tweak each one, and have different waveforms and octaves and everything and tunings. And then you have a mixer where you mix them all together. Filter section, which is kind of like a tone shaping thing. These envelopes, which change the way that the whole system reacts depending on, if you hit this, how fast the sound comes up or how fast it goes away, all those things. So, I mean, basically you can do 90% of the sounds that I use on records with just that basic understanding of a synth. And then, you go to the modulation and frequency modulation and filter modulation, all that stuff. You can start to do some interesting stuff. But I'd say this is the most versatile. I think it's also just basically, I use it more than any synth. So it's my go-to. Favorite synth of all time, same thing, is the Mini Moog. I think the Access Virus C, the C variant, was the one that I was really into, and that's I'll show you that one. I have this. I had to move some things around to play this set, so this is my old Virus. This is one of the first digital synths I ever got, and it's like a virtual analog and like a walk, the lead off a walk, and the lead off like hours. Basically, almost all at Dive. A lot of those leads were that. But then I got the Mini Moog right as I was finishing Dive, like 2 months before it, and I just started like I just got way into it, and I ended up doing all these overdubs. But it's funny because I go back to the sounds I made on the Virus, and like they're very Moog-like, so like, or Mini Moog-like. So I found myself like I was emulating this instrument like, before I even had it. What's a good keyboard to start with? That's a great question. So I think there's 2 schools of thought on that. Analog synths are cool and they sound great and they're really interesting. And they have this warmth and a character that at this point in my life, that's the first thing I would get. But they're also a little less versatile. They can only maybe make 3 waveforms, or they can't do like wavetables. So if you want to like have some super open-ended, synth that can do anything, that's going to be a little bit higher learning curve, you might go with a digital synth like a Novation Peak. I think a Novation was one of my first ones. The Virus is great. But really, I think if you're just starting out and wanting to get into synths, you can't beat like a very simple mono synth like a Moog. I think the Mother, I played the Mother once. Is that what it's called? Yeah, it's like the smaller version of the Matriarch. And that thing, I mean, it sounds like a Mini Moog to me, and it was really cool. I had like spring reverb on. So like if you're just in a band or something, I think that's the way to start. Or just anything if you want to get into synthesis. But then, you start to get into these kind of like modern analogs. This is a polyphonic analog, and then this is another polyphonic modern analog. Korg. This is a Korg Minilog. This is a Electron Analog 4 Mark II. Those are both really cool synths too. I use the heck out of this thing on Epoch, especially the album. This is like on every song. It just depends. I think you can't go wrong with this or like a Mother, a Moog Mother. I think either one's going to be able to get you where you want sonically. The tips for the patch on hours. You were looking at it. I actually played that on the album like I was saying, on the Virus. So it was a little bit different, but basically I'm using a triangle wave, which has like a lot of harmonics. I think I'm using 2 stacked with a tiny bit of offset to give it that kind of like interference pattern. And then just like some contour, like some envelope at like 11 o'clock or 10 o'clock, and then pretty short decay and sustain time to give it that percussive thing, like a pluck, and just a ton of reverb. Like a lot of my sounds are really like, if you heard them, you'd be like, that's a lame sound, and then you turn the reverb on and it sounds amazing. So it's like, a lot of those sounds are really about these lush, long, algorithmic reverbs, like 7-second reverbs that are high passed and have 0 pre-delay. So it's just like saturated. You never really hear the initial sound. You just hear this giant wall of reverb. So that's a big part of it. And then there's a lot of compression in the mix and effects bringing up the tails and changing the dynamics. So it's really all about effects after that. But the core tone is just a mini Moog tone. So room correction, I have Genelec, the Genelec GLM system. So it comes with a microphone and it has built-in EQs into each of the speakers. They're digital speakers. So you run AES into them and then they do all the conversion and stuff. We swept the room when I first got the space set up. Me and Count, the mix engineer I work with on a bunch of stuff. It's subtle correction though. I don't use like some of those extreme third-party ones. This is built into the speakers, but it seems to work really well. I feel like third-party ones, I'm not too familiar with them, but like if you aren't, if you don't really have a clear picture of what the speaker is, I'm sure they profile each of them, but if you don't have access to like the kind of the internals of the speaker, if it's a digital speaker with its own EQ, I don't think it's going to be as effective, but I'm sure anything's better than nothing. But you can't beat, for the real room correction is this stuff, is like all this, I don't know if, can you see that? All this material, this is like 4 feet of material between me and the wall, and that's just doing a ton of absorption and reflection, scattering, and those are bass traps and all that stuff. So I think start with, if you can't afford wall coverings, try to make your own, and if you can't do that, then I would go to room correction. But I think beyond monitors, like even before you get good monitors, correct your room, like do what you can to treat your room, because that's going to go further than even, you could put the best Genelecs in the world or whatever the best monitors in the world, and it's not going to matter if your room is a concrete box. Signal flow. Basically, what time we got before? Okay, we got 12 minutes left. Yeah, perfect. Here, let me take this off here. So we're looking at the main rack here, and this is so these are my 2 channels that pretty much the majority of stuff goes through those 2, or these 2 Shelfords. And the difference between those is these are 1076s, which are basically Neve 1073s, but they're detented. They're made for like mastering or whatever, being the end of a console chain. These are original like 70s ones. I know they still make 1073s, AMS Neve does, but I think what's really interesting is what Rupert Neve Designs are doing, which is these Shelfords, which are kind of like, a best of like all the kind of Neve eras. Like each band of these EQs is kind of focused on a different model, like a 1083 or whatever. And then or 1084. And this is a diode bridge compressor, which is like one of their coolest, I think, Vibius compressors, and that's built in. So anyways, those are kind of my channels. I use the Ursa a lot as a front end. This preamp actually sounds really interesting, even if you don't turn the reverb on. It's kind of like a Korg STD. And then over here is kind of my like effects outboard. These are my effects returns, these Chameleon Labs. I just like reverbs through these because they're clean, but they still have this interesting color to them. And then this SSL is where I do all the routing and like aux stuff if I'm out of the box. So basically, any given signal, and I'm talking when I'm doing out of the box. A lot of the time, I'll just go straight into the Shelford clean and have everything turned off and just have a little bit of high pass and just be using the preamp section. And then I'll go into pure effects and all the UAD. I use a ton of UAD stuff and like D16 reverbs and all that kind of stuff. But basically, the core of it is just getting I think just getting, and all that stuff I just mentioned is ridiculously expensive. So I'm not saying like, if you're young or just getting started out or whatever, or just anything. You don't need to spend, thousands of dollars on a preamp. But I do think some sort of, decent preamp with a transformer, if you like transformer sound, or a tube if you like tube sound, just something with some sort of analog circuitry other than just your sound card that's doing something. I've always found that interesting, and to give a little bit of character and not make things feel so kind of pristine, especially with synths. Synths, especially digital ones, can start to sound cold, and you want something to kind of warm those up. And sometimes you don't, though. Sometimes you want super clean. If you really want to capture like a reverb perfectly, I feel like clean is better. The UAD stuff is really interesting, the Apollos, because they have this thing called Unison, and I think their preamps sound incredible on their own. So it just depends on how much you want to spend, but you don't have to spend all this money to get the sounds that I'm getting. I mean, especially if you're listening to my old records, those were made with garbage. What I would consider now, like, oh, that's not good, but it's just how you use it. Anything can sound good. A Mackie mixer can sound fantastic. A lot of 90s drum and bass and electronic music that really inspired me was made with really basic equipment like that, like old Mackies and stuff. So even though, the old Mackies kind of were a different thing than they are now, but point being, you don't need all this stuff. I've been doing this for a long time and have collected a bunch of stuff, and I'm kind of into that side of things. So don't let that like throw you off or make you think you need all this to make good music. You just need a laptop and some creativity and a little bit of your time to focus and hone your abilities. I think that's the most important thing. One synth or gear that you don't have that you would like to own. I think some of the new Dave Smith stuff. I want a Matriarch, a Moog Matriarch. I've been like psyching myself up mentally to get one of those because I haven't gotten into modular yet. I do some really basic modular stuff around here with some of the stuff. I have like a Oberheim 4-voice working in a sort of a modular way, but I haven't totally dove into that. So that's kind of something I'm interested in. But I think the Dave Smith stuff as well, like the OB8 or the OB6, the Oberheim, that desktop module, and the Dave Smith Prophet 6, those seem really cool. I've got a Prophet 5, an old one over here, but just to have all those new facilities on there and a similar sound would be cool. A Moog 1, that's crazy. Like, that's the thing is, like, yes, of course I'd love to get a Moog 1, but it's like, I feel like I would only scratch the surface of the synthesis, and it's like, if I'm going to get something like that, I want to know, like if I'm going to get an Oberheim Matrix 12, I want to know that I'm going to like dig into matrix modulation matrices and like all the deep stuff in there. I wouldn't want to get that and then like kind of like waste it and just make like mini Moog sounds since I already have a mini Moog. And I've got enough Moog things here that I can kind of do some interesting stuff with like round robin polyphonic, but yeah, not right now, but definitely that's like, but that's like dream synth. Who knows? Maybe someday I'll get that. So how do you decide between using something in software versus hardware? It's just kind of it depends on what you're going for. I don't look at the hardware and software as being, one being better or worse. It's just like, I think this will sound good with a D16 Toraverb, and that's a plugin. So might as well just go all plugins, or so I'll just use a plugin workflow for that sound. And then if I'm feeling like I want to be inspired, or because sometimes you'll be inspired by the computer, and sometimes you're inspired by all these knobs and all this physical equipment. I think there's something to that, to touching and feeling things is really important. So sometimes when you kind of get bored of the workflow of a computer, it's nice to be able to fall back on the equipment. But it's basically just like, it's also like later in the phases of a song, a lot of the times I'll start to use more and more software just because I don't need a ton of character or tone or all this. I don't want to take up much space because the song is already crowded. So I'll start to use more digital effects where I can really hone in and really kind of focus things down and use simple, if I'm just doing like simple layers and things like that, I feel like, software for me is more suited to that just because it's a little bit more tweakable. Were the beats sampled today? Yeah, the drums. I'm not playing the drums, so yeah, those are just getting triggered. All the and on the albums, those are mostly Rory playing, but like chopped up into loops and stuff. So like for the live show, I used basically some of the the stuff from the live show today is mostly what you heard. You heard kind of like chunks of it. So all that stuff is just kind of being triggered. Do you use the Mac to sequence MIDI or just a KeyStep? I use the Mac for pretty much everything. I use the KeyStep. I just got the KeyStep Pro. I used, and it's amazing. Like, I love that thing. Like, it's going to be kind of like I think that's the one that's going to go everywhere with me, like go on tour, because it's the perfect size for kind of like, warming up backstage and just tweaking on ideas in hotel rooms and stuff. And it just has a really interesting the way that sequencer works. I love the Novation 49 SL and K3. They're both very similar, but they both can kind of do things the other can't, so it's nice to have both of them. So I'll create some of the sequences on those and then transfer it to the computer, but like I'm not like building whole songs out of those. The small mixer, I already answered this, but this is just a Softtube console one. It's like it just controls software. It's like it's just a controller, but it's really handy for stuff like this. Reverb pedals, the Big Sky, of course, is my go-to, and the Maris Mercury 7, and for reverb, I guess, and the Auto Bam, I love that thing. Those are kind of my big reverb pedals. Chase Bliss does, I don't know, can you see this? This is kind of like a bunch of my pedals. Chase Bliss has some cool stuff. Here's the Maris Mercury 7. This is kind of my floating reverb. I'll use this, just like put it on top of a synth and just use it, whereas like I'll keep the other ones racked up. But yeah, those are my big go-tos. Do you find using heavy reverb constrains the kind of harmony you play? Yeah, a lot of the time, and a lot of my newer stuff, I've started like backing the reverb off and kind of finding new ways to use it or use shorter ones. But again, I mean, I use reverb as an effect and almost like a writing tool where it's like you're almost creating harmonies with the note that you just played. So like you play a note, it gets caught in the reverb, and so it's basically sustaining that as a pad. And then you play the next note, and you've created like almost like a chord. So like a lot of my chord progressions kind of evolve out of heavy effects in that way. So it looks like we're running out of time. This thing cuts off at an hour. So sorry I didn't catch all the questions. Hope I got enough of them, and hope you guys enjoyed the performance. And thank you to Moog for having me. This was really fun. So hope you guys are all staying safe and healthy, and I will see you next time. Have a good day.